I'm Daphne, and I'm currently the co-founder of Venue Fragrances, a luxury fragrance brand that rich Asian heritage with a very modern and global creative sensibility. So we tell stories via scent, which is building very immersive sensory experiences that can connect people to culture, identity, and memories. Before Venue, I actually started my career in investment banking and then later on spent years working in like consumer tech companies. I was very very fortunate to be part of the early team of Uber in Vietnam, and then later on led the regional strategy for Binance in Asia. And obviously along the way I somehow like got my MBA from Harvard Business School. After Uber sold our business to Grab, a local competitor. And now I'm really excited to start building the next chapter in my career where I can continue to build Venue, but at the same time can help other founders in other team at pivotal moments. And exploring fractional work just feels like a perfect way to do that. Very high impact, very collaborative, and full of possibility. Yeah, so I joined in 2014 as an operations manager in Vietnam. So I think probably among the first like 5 or 10 employees in the region, but first in Vietnam. When Uber enters a new market, it really moved at a lightning speed, and I saw that firsthand when I joined as a first full-time employee in Vietnam. So, like I said, I was an operations manager, and my job was to get as many drivers on the road as possible. But this was at the time when not many drivers in Vietnam even have even a smartphone, right? So the job wasn't just about like onboarding drivers, but also about building the entire ecosystem from scratch. And what shocked me the most wasn't just like the pace at Uber, but it was how much autonomy we were given. I mean, all of the team was probably in our early to mid like 20s. Many of us ex bankers or ex consultants. But here we were, given a lot of responsibility and full ownership to launching and scaling the business. There was no manual. There was no HQ micromanagement, just an immense amount of trust. So I remember my first week, we need to give smartphone to drivers, right? Because like not many of them had that, and we didn't even have a local entity at that point. We didn't have a company credit card. And I remember like taking my mom's credit card to get like 50 iPhones for drivers. Obviously, we got reimbursed afterwards, but I remember my mom like called me in panic, like literally she thought that I probably joined some kind of like scam and like spending her credit card. But obviously that trust combined with a sense of like purpose in the company really generate this insane kind of dedication, right? I, would come home someday at 4 a.m. and still felt very excited, like waking up the next day and like, did it over again. And I think that experience really taught me a lot about, in an environment where there's a lot of uncertainties, but required, like speed execution. The key is really to hire the right people, to inspire them with a very clear purpose and giving them the trust to figure that out, right? And that combination is what I think makes the impossible feel very doable. I think what really differentiates, Uber from a lot of traditional software companies that ultimately Uber deals with the physical world, right? Like we like to say that, it's the atoms, which is, different from other companies like Tinder, for example, right? We have to be very close to the problem. I talk a lot about like, decentralizing and like, empowering the local team to do what's right. But I think that's like the secret sauce of what makes Uber work. For example, back in 2015, Vietnam was the first market in Southeast Asia to launch cash payment. And at that time, I think like HQ, like people, the product team in SF was really against that. And I understood the reason, there's something so magical about the Uber experience, right? Like you push a button, right? You get into the car and you get out, without payment, right? There's no hustle, no wallet, right? And that kind of frictionless payment flow is really part of the brand DNA. But obviously at that time, the credit card penetration in Vietnam was like in low single digit, right? And if we didn't accept cash, we simply would just like lose to local competitors. So it took a lot of pushing and data to convince the product team in SF. But when we got the green light, right, it just unlocked tremendous growth for us and eventually for other markets. So I think it's like about empowering the local team to push for what works in their markets and then try to scale that, right, across other markets in developing countries, right, be it India, right, or be it like, somewhere in the Middle East that may also need cash payments, which is something that perhaps like the product team in SF, just couldn't imagine like how it would make the user experience better. So yeah, so I think another thing that I learned from Uber, which is the emphasis on building the internal playbooks and sharing knowledge across markets, right? So it was about structured experimentations and documentation, right? So I learned to act fast and lean into local insights and back it up with data, but also like how to codify success, right? Not just scaling, but also scaling smart, right? So that really informed like how I, kind of operate ever since, right? Which is a strong bias toward action based on both insights and intuition, very fast iterations, and ultimately like, building system for repeatable success. I mean, I think when Uber sold to Grab, I kind of like completed my kind of like 4 years at Uber. I thought about like what to do next. I've always wanted to either start something on my own or join a very early stage company. So I never really thought that, an MBA was sort of necessary, right? Because you can arguably just go work at a startup and, get that kind of experience. But I thought I want to have a break, after like 4 years of Uber, I was pretty exhausted and I thought, going to business school can help me like deepen the network. Not interested in building maybe a people kind of company. I do have ambition to build a lasting organizations and maybe in order to reach that level, I need to equip myself with, certain kind of skill set or knowledge or awareness and or network, right? So yeah, so that's the backstory of like why Harvard. So one of the reasons why was that there are a lot of former Ubers at Binance. And one of my sort of like former coworkers who was the GM in Malaysia, he joined Binance as the, like head of Asia Pacific. So he hired me, right? And also there's tons of, other Ubers at Binance. And I thought that, there was some similarities, right, between Uber and Binance because like both companies had a lot of like regulatory challenges, but obviously Binance was even harder, right? Because it's concerning money and like the financial system. So it's even a bit more complicated. I think like the first day I joined Binance, I'm not mistaken, there was the Luna crash. Like I think like 6, 7, I mean, almost a year I was at Binance. It was, like the crypto winter, right? And then ultimately the FTX collapse. So it was a very interesting time to be in crypto, to be honest. The honest answer is I don't think I was perfect at it, but I did learn a lot. For context, Binance was mostly remote, meaning it was a very global company with teams spread across the world, right? So it make the team dynamics uniquely challenging. And honestly, there are some days that I'm genuinely amazed how the company functioned at all. Because like people rarely met in person and somehow like it still work, right? So what I have, for what it's worth is that Binance does have a very strong and ambitious and clear purpose, which is to increase freedom of money globally, right? And that clarity really gives people a deeper reason to stay engaged, even when like, things are really, really tough. And for me as a leader, I think I did really lean on into like radical clarity, right? Which is over communicating what I know, what I don't know, and what I think we should do next, right? I was based at that time still in Vietnam, but I managed a team in the Philippines, in India, and in Dubai, right? So across very, very different time zone. And it took a lot of efforts for me, but I think it's worth it to have consistent one-on-one with my team, right? So we just really focus on what we could control, celebrate small wins, and really create space for people to ask me really hard questions, right? And sometimes I can be very frank with them about like, look, like I really don't know the answer, but ultimately I think like one insight that I got from my finance experience that especially for people join a company in such a nascent space like crypto, they don't really need a lot of stability, right? What they need actually momentum, clarity, and autonomy, and the feeling of like they're being empowered and trust to make an impact even when things are in chaos. I think like, if I were to share my own personal thoughts, I think a lot of people join crypto companies or, join blockchain in the past for the money, right? I mean, it used to be such a lucrative space and there were a lot of opportunities to make good money because the people who just in for the money by, either have left because they made a lot of money or they just, like crash, right? So I think crypto is still very, very, very early on, right? For the valuation and for the all the money that is, that people have invested in, it's still very in a very, very early stage because I think that most crypto companies haven't really figured out like what, I mean, except for Bitcoin, right? I think the builders in the blockchain and crypto space still have a long way to go in order to kind of figure it out, like the real use case and impact they can have, in the world. Yeah. So international remittance is actually one of the biggest use case, I think, for crypto. And during my time at Binance, we were trying to write some white paper on using crypto as stablecoin for remittances because I was in charge of the Philippines market. And in the Philippines, remittance actually play a very important part, to the local economy. So I do see the potential of stablecoin for remittances. Yeah. So I keep like joking to people that, the last like maybe 10 years of my career, I had been on every single hot internet trend of the decade. I had done e-commerce, I had done ride hailing, I had done cryptocurrency, right? It's like, should I do AI? It's my like next startup. But I feel like, after spending many years, kind of like having other executive vision, I realized that I'm deeply drawn to the emotional side of products, right? How they make people feel, how they carry meaning, how they can express identity and culture. And I think fragrance to me just felt like the perfect medium. It's very intimate, it's very immersive, it's very narrative driven. And frankly, I think there's a gap in the market for, a fragrance brand that's telling agent stories. Because I think most luxury fragrance brand are perhaps having inspiration from like France or Italy, right? And I think there are like interesting stories that is what they're telling, right? And I genuinely want to build a world class brand that tell agent story. I really want to emphasize and elevate Asia. Its cultural origins points. And yeah, and then that meant applying everything I had learned from go to market to product to branding, but obviously doing it with my own voice and in my own terms. Yeah, so we in like the R&D process for the last like 2 years because I had no background in fragrances. I had no idea how to make it, right? So obviously it took me a while to actually figure out like the supply chain. But we're splitting our time between Vietnam and New York City. The biggest shock is that, oh gosh, this is so hard. Just kidding. Like literally like this is like really, 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 really hard. Because I guess like when I joined Uber, I mean, we had a fantastic product, right? So I didn't have to work on the product, right? So it was more of like taking maybe 10 to 100 or like 100 to like 200, right? Taking from 0 to 1 is hard in a sense that, how do I say it? I think like when you don't have a lot of capital, right? You don't have a big team. You don't have a proof of concept yet. Like sometimes it's kind of hard to believe what you're building, right? Because you don't even know whether it's gonna work. Really want to. I think my whole life I have been very analytical. I'm trained to be good at pattern recognition, right? So I think that building venue and like taking it from like the ground zero just kind of remind me that when you're creating something from scratch, the most valuable asset is probably your point of view and your ability to believe in it before the market does. Yeah. So I think I've been increasingly drawn to the idea of having a portfolio career recently. I think like the future of work is going to change so much. I think the reason why I'm drawn to this idea is probably because of flexibility, right? I'm building my own venture venue, but I still want to stay engaged with other companies where I can add real value, right? And going fractional can allow me to apply everything I've learned from scaling other companies, but in a way that feels more focused and high leverage. And the upside is impact, right? But the challenge, especially early on, is how, I can build trust really, really fast, right? Most often without a lot of full context, right? Or full authority. So I think not not all fractional role is going to be a right fit. And for me personally, I think I look for teams where I know that I can add almost sort of like immediate value and hit the ground running. So that's my point of view for fractional. For some weird reason, I think I really thrive in chaos for whatever reason. Maybe there's something about like my personality or like my own kind of like personal experience. But I think honestly, like trust in chaotic moments really don't come from, like big switches, right? Even though they might help, like communication really, really, really help. But I think it really comes from clarity, consistency, and momentum. I think when I step into a new team or a new project, I think one of my strengths is that I I tend to define my role very early on with very clear expectation, right? And I'm really good at like trying to identify a couple of like early wins, right? So that I can show that I'm not just talking, right? But I'm also moving. And I think especially in a very sort of like high pressure moments, people don't really expect perfection, right? But what they do need is someone who can bring a sense of calm, right? Who can follow through and have them move forward, right? And I think I'm also pretty good at kind of like make sense of complexity pretty quickly. So that's when the trust happen and, like can help, certain team during some pivotal moment in their transformation. I've been pretty consistent with like consumer, right? Whether it's like consumer tech or, consumer brands. So, I mean, maybe something like a B2B SaaS wouldn't work for me because I just didn't have, that kind of experience. But anything like consumer facing, anything that deal with, market expansion or international expansion, I would know exactly what to do, right? Because, if you look at my experience, with Uber, my experience at Binance, and now like, we're building an Asian company with a presence in the US. So, anything that concerning consumers, international expansion, market expansion. And I think I have a sort of like unique niche in kind of like, working for companies that having a lot of like regulatory challenges, right? So like Uber or Binance. So any kind of industry that may need, not just how to like grow really, really quickly, but also in a very constrained environment, right? Whether they need to convince regulators of, like their innovation or if they need to engage with also like the press to tell a better narrative, right? So those kind of opportunities tend to be, what I'm very comfortable with.